Our beading lesson for today is about making a coiled bracelet from memory wire and beads. So take a look at these bracelets right here, and you'll see it's a very simple concept, but there are some tips that make this a little bit more intricate looking, even though all you're doing is stringing beads onto the wire. I like to use this technique with a variety of rounds because by changing the size, you can really change up the texture of the bracelet and give it some really kind of intricate looking effects. I also like to use variegated stones for this because that also creates a look of texture, even though they don't actually have a textured surface. The variegation in color on those stone beads makes them look a little bit more textured. So what you'll need to start out with is memory wire. And memory wire comes in a coil like this. It has been tempered so that it retains its shape, and you don't need to use a clasp. It also comes in different colors, so that's something to keep in mind when you're planning your design. Now, a friend asked me, how do you begin when you haven't made any jewelry? Where do you start? And I suggested to her that she might want to get some different colors of round beads. And the reason is because it's very simple shape, and you don't feel overwhelmed by how they go together because they already go together, they're all round. We are using some different sizes here. We have 8, 4, and 6 millimeter. And again, kind of that color palette, this is a warm with some browns in there. I pulled this from the color wheel. And anytime you need some help deciding on colors, of course, you can go to the color wheel and look at color palettes that work well together. So to get started, you'll need a couple of tools. You need a memory wire cutter anytime you're using memory wire. The reason is because these are tempered also, so they don't get damaged by the memory wire. Because it's such a tough wire to cut, you can take a little notch out of your regular wire cutters. And you'll probably hear us say that again this season. You also want to use some special pliers that have a bail-making tip. This has a small cylindrical on one side and a larger one on the other side. This is easier than using the kind of cone-shaped round nose pliers because you can really get good leverage on the wire. So we'll start out by cutting just a few rings here. My tip for cutting wire is to just sort of pull these loops apart so that you can tell where you are. And I like to use an odd number of strands, and I usually have my ends kind of overlapping. So I'll go with my 3 here. And I'll go ahead and cut this with my memory wire cutter. And then I'll loop one of the ends. And to loop, I like to roll it against the natural curve of the wire. I just think it's easier because you're not trying to force that tempered wire to keep coiling. You're actually going back. Okay, so you have a nice loop on the end of your wire. Now you're ready to start stringing. So what you can do is add these beads in groups of 3, 5, or 7. And think of it as little color blocks. So you get a few beads on here, and you can see a pattern starting to develop. The main things to keep in mind about adding these beads are try not to be too repetitive about the size or the color. So the number of beads isn't quite so important, but here I'm adding 3, 4 millimeters, and I have 3, 6 millimeters, and those look good together. You wouldn't want necessarily the same size all in a row. So I would just slide these all the way around until I get to the end. Keep adding beads. Now you can see here on this bracelet that I never added beads that are the same either to the loops here. So they're not same next to each other, they're not same across the loops either. This gives it a more intricate looking effect, even though all you're doing is varying your beads onto the strand. So one thing you'll notice during this season is that everybody has a different method for making wrapped loops. What you do is start out with a head pin and a bead, and my method for this is to take my round nose pliers, and I'm just going to make a little 90-degree angle here at the top, and it's just about the same width as the tip of my pliers. Then I'm going to move my pliers over and roll it back to make that perfect loop. Just roll it toward the stem like that. So it's a circle at the top of your stick. Then you're holding your chain nose pliers, hold that loop inside there, and then I use my fingers to wrap this around. You can make this very neat coil, or you can double coil over the top of your original. So just kind of work your way back up the stem toward the loop. And then instead of trying to get this really tight against here, I would just come in with my regular wire cutter, not my memory wire cutter, and cut this away. And then I have a nice little dangle. Now we're going to make 3 of these to attach to each end of the bracelet. And that's just, it's just a way of adding a designer touch to the end. It's like saying your stamp that you made it. So I would go ahead and make 3 of these. Then I'm trim this one We'll set that aside. So at the end of your bracelet, you're going to use that same memory wire looper to coil the end. Then you can reopen it to attach all of your dangles here. So this is, again, adding some flair. You could add some charms on here. I just chose some of the leftover beads from my bracelet to make my dangles. And then you close it up and you're all set. So let's take a look at my finished bracelets. I used a couple of different color palettes here so you can see how you can really change up the look by using different beads.